Many of you know me as a Master Maokai support main, but with the recent nerfs in the last 3 patches, you may be worried that I'll start dropping down in ranks. Fear not, my friends, for I have returned to the kitchen cooking up a secret support pick that has boosted me straight up the ladder. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how I like to build ZYRA support, and as a brief preview, it does not involve Liandry's Torment. I will be going over items, runes, and playstyle in this ZYRA support guide. Wait a minute, did he really say he doesn't build Liandry's Torment, the supposed #1 item on ZYRA support? Yes, that's right. I've actually found a lot of success with my ZYRA build by not buying Liandry's Torment. Now, I'm not saying this item is bad on ZYRA. Theoretically, it actually goes quite well with her kit. Her plants can easily proc the Suffering passive, causing her to deal an extra 6% damage while in combat. The Torment passive is also great since any ability damage will deal 6% of the target's maximum health and magic damage. And it's super easy to tag someone with a ZYRA plant from a safe distance. On paper, Liandry's Torment does seem perfect for ZYRA. However, why do I still stray away from purchasing this item if it feels so core to her? Money. This item costs 3,000 gold and it takes the support forever to build this item. Most supports get online with their first legendary item for as low as 2,200 gold. Having an 800 gold deficit as ZYRA support feels terrible, as you are not able to reach your first item power spike quickly enough relative to the enemy support. So what other item can we build that's cheaper to make sure we are relevant in the game? The first legendary item that I most frequently purchase on ZYRA support is Rylai's Crystal Scepter. In fact, I'm the only Master Plus player in North America who builds Rylai as their core first item, with one of the highest win rates on ZYRA support. What makes this item so valuable in my opinion is the Rime Frost passive, which slows any unit that has been affected by your ability damage by 30% for 1 second. Although this may not seem like a significant slow, it greatly deters enemies from advancing vision, and it also gives your teammates enough time to kite out fights. There is already so much damage in the game that as a support, you often just need to provide utility for your team in order to win a teamfight. Setting up your carry for an optimal teamfight has been my key to success to winning with ZYRA support. The damage you end up outputting will be slightly lower, but not significantly. Targets that are slowed will take a couple of extra attacks from your plants, which make up for the lack of passive you would have typically gotten from Liandry's Torment. Usually, the limiting factor for ZYRA's plant to slow is her cooldown on Root and Grasp, since only ZYRA's E plant can naturally slow. However, with Rylai's build, ZYRA's Q plant can also slow, which changes her playstyle completely. You'll notice here that the Rime Frost passive is reapplied each time ZYRA's plants damage the target. Her Q ability is on a much lower cooldown, meaning you no longer have to wait for more than a few seconds to have a plant available, as long as you have a seed on the rift, which can be spawned from either her passive or W. What's great about going Rylai's Crystal Scepter first is that as long as you place your Q plant in some proximity to your intended target, you will slow them. It's very similar to how Maokai can use his saplings to slow a target down, except for ZYRA it will be on a much lower cooldown. Additionally, your Q plant also has an attack range of 575, so it will take even longer for enemies to get away from the usual E plant, which has a much smaller attack range of 400. ZYRA's effective range to proc Rylai's is insanely large when you add up both the Q plant cast range and the attack range of the plant itself. I cannot think of a single champion who can apply ability damage from nearly 1,500 units away on an average cooldown of only 5 seconds, and requires no skill shot accuracy. A key tip to guarantee CC with Rylai's Crystal Scepter is to use the Q plant slow first, making it significantly easier to land your E ability. You'll also want to use your Q plants to help uncover unwarded bushes and use them in teamfights to really slow down the battlefield. Since we are going to be lacking damage with this build, I want to clearly explain the main theory of this build. Your goal as ZYRA support will be to spam all the plants. We want to just be as annoying as possible. Your Q plants don't just tickle anymore, they will slow enemies down and make them think twice before advancing forward. In this build, cooldown reduction is our biggest ally, and thus instead of building sorcery boots, we will opt for lucidity boots. The additional 15 ability haste simply means more plants equaling more slows. With this build, we always want to think utility, not damage. As a bonus, Lucidity Boots is 200 gold cheaper than Sorc Boots, making it a great value pickup. Alright, so you're probably thinking, purchasing Rylai's Crystal Scepter first is a neat idea, but surely, building a Liandry's Torment must be the next move, right? Well, I hate to break it to you, but your opposing support's next item is still going to be dirt cheap, meaning it is highly unlikely you can keep up with the amount of legendary items they have unless you have stolen a lot of kills from your ADC. Therefore, in my opinion, the better item to build next is another cheap legendary item called Imperial Mandate. The base stats on this item work great on ZYRA, providing 20 ability haste for more plants, 60 ability power, and 125% mana regen, all for a low cost of 2300 gold. What truly makes this item stand out is the Coordinated Fire passive. This passive states that any ability that slows or immobilizes an enemy marks them for 5 seconds. Allied champions that damage the marked enemy is granted a 25% bonus movement speed for 2 seconds. What stat have I always said is the most overpowered? Movement speed. As long as you are slowing enemies, your allies can now proc the mark and better reposition in teamfights. These marks can be refreshed after 9 seconds per champion. All of this is happening while the enemy team is constantly slowed by your army of plants. And guess what? I haven't even talked about the other half of Imperial Mandate's passive. When the mark you applied with your Q and E plants are procced, your ally will deal 12% of the target's current health as bonus magic damage. This easily compensates for the damage you've been lacking since we haven't bought Liandry's Torment. The only caveat here is that you will need to have a nearby ally to help proc the mark. This is very important to note. You will only deal significant damage if your ally can proc the mark. You won't be soloing enemy carries anymore as ZYRA support, so as a squishy support player, please play near your carries. Don't go roaming alone and trying to play with your typical mage AP build. This role is called support, so let's stick with that concept and use Imperial Mandate to its fullest extent. Overall, if you're able to build these two items by the 24-minute mark, you are in great shape. This is probably where I'd say your build spikes and your allies will really start noticing the power of utility ZYRA. Feel free to build an Oblivion Orb if there is significant healing on the enemy team. Here is our core build for ZYRA support. We have Lucidity Boots, Zazak's Realm Spike, Rylai's Crystal Scepter, Imperial Mandate, and Oblivion Orb, all for a total cost of 7,000 gold. The total base stats of this build is listed on the left. Compare this to a more typical standard build of Sorcery Boots, Zazak's Realm Spike, Rylai's Crystal Scepter, and Liandry's Torment, for a total cost of 7,100 gold. The total base stats for this build is on the right. Both builds are similar in cost, and they even provide a similar amount of AP. However, let me highlight the key differences. In the first build, you additionally get Grievous Wounds, 125% mana regeneration, 35 more ability haste, 12% summoner spell cooldown, the Coordinated Fire passive, and an extra pink ward. In the second build, you only get 18 magic penetration, 300 health, and the Liandry's Torment passive. If you've gotten this far in the video, you'll probably guess that I prefer the more supportive playstyle, the build on the left. In my opinion, the overall build path in the first build is simply a lot smoother for a support economy, allowing you to keep up with the enemy support's power spikes. Additionally, since you have purchased Rylai's first, your Q plants are now actually useful from the 12-minute mark of the game. If your game does somehow reach 30 minutes, this is where you are approaching the late game. Hopefully, you have now been able to feed your carry appropriately and contest all the objectives. If you have leftover gold, then okay, I admit, you can finally build towards Liandry's Torment. You'll probably have to sit on a Haunting Guise for quite a while though, as your last inventory spot will be taken up by either pink wards or an Oblivion Orb. For my rune setup, I've personally found most success with going your typical sorcery keystone page using Comet, Maniflow Band, and Scorch. The third row is where I go off the beaten path and run Celerity. The extra 7% movement speed feels really nice to help dodge skill shots and escape tricky situations where you may be caught. It also works really well with the coordinated ZYRA passive you end up building from Imperial Mandate, giving you a huge boost of speed in teamfights. For my secondary rune, I usually go Taste of Blood for sustain and Relentless Hunter, which helps me roam to different lanes and reach objectives faster. Many supports in the Season 14 meta have so much movement speed in their kit that you really do need all the movement speed you can get to match opposing roams. Lastly, for the rune shards, I prefer going 8 ability haste because again, our goal is not really to do damage but to spam as many plants as possible. Next, I take the 2% movement speed for better kiting on ZYRA Support, which goes hand in hand with the Celerity rune. Finally, I take the early health rune shard if I'm against an all-in lane, and the scaling health rune shard if I'm against a less scary lane. In terms of playstyle, I've already mentioned this many times throughout the video, but I'll state it again. Your goal is to produce as many plants as possible. This is why cooldown reduction is so important in this build, because your strength as a support is not damage, but instead utility. You want to be as annoying as possible, and similar to Maokai, put plants around objective entrances and in choke points to prevent the enemy from ever advancing. Treat ZYRA as a mega distributor of plants where you get to decide how the enemy will approach a teamfight. Spread all the seeds and fertilize the rift. Your skill path upgrade will be E, W, Q. The reason why we want to max W second is that rank 1W only refreshes your seeds every 18 seconds, while rank 5W refreshes your seeds every 10 seconds. You're essentially doubling the amount of plants you can get by level 13 with all skill points on W rather than getting some extra damage on Q. There's no point of maxing Q anyways if you have trouble landing this tricky skill shot. Additionally, the attack damage from a Q plant itself scales with ZYRA's level, not the actual rank of Q. Remember that your damage will be lacking, but you will make up for it by providing superior vision control and slow utility for your team. Be patient with your plants. Once you have Rylai's Crystal Scepter, you will almost always want to start a skirmish with your Q plant first to slow the enemy down and then throw your E plant to root them. This is the opposite of how ZYRA players usually work since they want to root enemies before applying their Q. In my opinion, going Rylai's first is much easier to play since landing your E skill shot can be difficult if the target isn't movement impaired. Keep close to an ally in mid-game teamfights to ensure you use the most out of your coordinated ZYRA passive from Imperial Mandate. This will sound super trivial, but staying alive is key on ZYRA Support since you want to be able to spam as many plants as possible. The more you slow, the higher you'll grow. I do want to point out that this Rylai's into Mandate build probably works better in above average ranks. This is because in higher elos, there isn't as much gold available for support players compared to the more frequent teamfight gameplay style you see in the lower ranks. Lastly, there are 2 exception scenarios where I will build Liandry's Torment as a first or second item on ZYRA Support. The first exception is if I have taken a lot of early kills from my ADC and it becomes my responsibility to build damage heavy items. Similarly, if I don't think my team even has a reliable carry to play around, then as ZYRA Support, you do still have the option to play standard and become a massive AP threat. The second exception scenario is if my bot laner is a more utility-based carry such as Senna or Seraphine. Damage is an important stat to build in League of Legends, and if there is already enough utility amongst you and your bot laner, at least one of you should probably be building items to deal damage. Alright then, hopefully this ZYRA build will be helpful to some of you older support players who have trouble landing skill shots. If you enjoyed this content, make sure to hit that like button and consider hitting that subscribe button too. It really does help. If you have any thoughts regarding my build on ZYRA Support, please let me know in the comments below.